episode of the Next Wave podcast. I'm here with a special guest. This is Dr. Jackey Smith.
Hey.
Dr. Jackey Smith, you were the head of social workers at Kaiser. You've done a lot of work with mental health and the broader healthcare system. Also a San Francisco native.
Born and raised.
And I see a member of the Alphas.
Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated.
Alpha Phi Alpha. Okay, yeah, I didn't pledge, but all my friends who have pledged were with that fraternity.
You just got to put some respect.
Okay, cool. I'm not sure. I know y'all take it serious. I know y'all get down. So, thank you for joining us today. Like I said before, I want to do something special for my target audience, which I would describe as inner city men, 16 to 25. And I know you do a lot of work with mental health spaces. Before we get into that, I kind of wanted to know a little bit more about your background, your upbringing, what it was like growing up black in San Francisco, and what are some of the things that kind of stood out to you?
So let me just clarify. I was the manager of the social work, the inpatient social work department at Kaiser Permanente in San Francisco. So now I'm managing the Medi-Cal program for Kaiser Permanente through Northern California. Just wanted to correct that. But born and raised here in San Francisco, October 22nd, 1979, born on a Monday, San Francisco General Hospital, 4:04 p.m. I'm the only child of my parents on both sides, raised in what we call the Double Rock Projects. They called it Alice Griffith Garden Homes. I didn't know it to be Alice Griffith Garden Homes. I just knew it to be the Jets. Lived with my grandparents. So I grew up in the 80s, in the 90s. So I grew up when San Francisco was a much different place than what it is right now. Diversity was something that was real and embraced. It was different, but it was normal because this was all I knew.
When you say diversity, you talking about like within the black community or the city of San Francisco?
I mean both. Okay. So I mean within the black community. I mean, because what we have to keep in perspective is the Bayview Hunters Point, back in the day was actually the seat of where a lot of the black middle class lived, right? And so when I share that with people, they kind of look at me and they're like, what do you mean? Well, you look at home ownership. These were black people who owned their homes. These are homes that are worth millions, multi-million dollars, now. The generational wealth for some people was passed down. For others, they didn't get the lesson and they sold out. And they did what they felt that they had to do. I wasn't a part of one of those families who ever owned a home. Right? So my grandparents on my mother's side had, my grandmother had a 3rd grade education, my grandfather had a 6th grade education, but they were two of the most brilliant people that I ever knew. My mother was a single, parent. My story was that when my mother would kill me if she knew that I was saying this, but my mother and my father were friends. And the story goes that my father tried to get at my mom, and my mom said, come back when I turn 21, because she was like 16, 17. On her 21st birthday, my mother says that my daddy showed up, knocked on the door. And I said, Mom, really? She says, well, I'm a woman of my word. And I was conceived, in my grandparents', my grandmother's house, because my grandmother on my dad's side lived across the street, right?
In a house across the street?
No, in the projects.
Okay.
No, in the projects. Yeah, people like to talk about how they had this beautiful conception story. When I found out with my conception story that I was conceived on the pull-out couch.
Oh, wow.
And I've told my dad that apparently you didn't have a good pull-out game because, 9 months later, here I am.
Yeah.
And I'm able to share that because it's my story.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important because as black men and as people, one of the things that we've kind of tried to do is we've tried to edit our story to make it be acceptable, right? To make it be, attractive. I'd love to sit here and tell you, that I grew up in a 2-parent household and, I come from a generation where higher education was embraced and my parents were this and so on and so forth. No. My mother was a high school graduate. She had some college, City College of San Francisco. I didn't find out that my father didn't graduate high school until after I had graduated with my bachelor's degree. And my mother's belief was, well, I didn't tell you that because I thought that that would have stopped you.
Do you think it would have had an effect on you?
No, because the reality was, my father was a part of my life up until I was about 5. And then he succumbed to drug addiction, and he was a crackhead. And I tell people they don't make crackheads the way that they made crackheads back in the 80s and in the 90s. Now, look, we didn't have mad scientists like y'all have today with people making thithi and whatever else they constructing and, being mad scientists in the kitchen. Either you smoke crack, you smoke weed, you drank, and then you might have somebody who was a heroin addict, right? But knowing about all this meth and stuff, we didn't have that.
Yeah.
So my life was marred with the impact of substance abuse, single parenthood, the stability in my life, other than my mother, was my grandparents. My grandfather was a solid black man who was born and raised in Shreveport, Louisiana. My grandmother was from Shreveport, Louisiana. They didn't meet there. They actually met here in San Francisco,
Wow.
in South Park. And when I look at where I came from, I came from and was reared by people who understood and appreciated the value of family. So while I didn't come from the traditional family background, I came from family, right? I came from, no matter what it is you're going through, we might not be rich, we're gonna pull together, we're gonna figure it out. And so my community within Double Rock became an extension of my family, right? So I grew up during a time when it was called the kill zone. Right. This is when there was just an increase of murders every single day. Boys in the Hood was, a movie that John Singleton had directed and written some years ago, but that was the reality of what we lived, right? So going to the movies and seeing Boys in the Hood, it resonated differently.
Yeah.
So growing up black in San Francisco, I went to public school.
Which schools?
I went to Bret Hart for K through 5, 5th grade, and then I went to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Academic Middle School, 350 Girard Boulevard over there on San Bruno.
Yeah.
And then I graduated high school from the School of the Arts when it was located behind San Francisco State 700 Font Boulevard.
What was your art?
Theater.
Thespian.
I was a thespian.
What made you sorry for
No.
make this a longer story. What kind of made you do you still practice it or?
You know what? It's a love that I have. I
Yeah.
haven't been able to. The last thing that I did was years ago when I got after I got married. So I've been married 18 years. So the last time that I actually performed was 18 years ago. But what got me into it was I was a kid who was introverted and quiet, but I was also a kid who was angry, right? And you have to understand that when you grow up in the household that I grew up in, the only emotion that was ever really validated was anger, because we didn't know how to deal with anything else. Life was too real. There was too much going on. No one had the time and the opportunity to say, "Oh, baby, how does that make you feel?" Or let's talk about what it is that you're going through. No, you couldn't be a punk.
Yeah.
It was, you got to pull it together. You figure it out. Boy, wipe your face.
Yeah.
Right. So I learned to stuff and to internalize. And it wasn't until I got to elementary school, and the first play that I was ever in was in 3rd grade. A teacher by the name of Caroline Zidek put me in a play, and she made me play an old man, and I had two grandkids, in this play.
Nailed it.
Nailed it, because who was
I'm
I
already
raised
knowing.
by?
Yeah.
Who was I raised by?
Yeah.
Right. So, 5th grade, Miss Clavery changed my life. She was my 5th grade teacher. She was a black woman from New Orleans, Louisiana, and she not only helped to develop the love for theater, she also helped to further the love that I have for cooking. My grandmother was an amazing cook. And so Miss Clavery would incorporate food into our classroom. And this would bring the community together. So when I talk about diversity, right, we're talking about, I grew up with Samoans. I grew up with people who were Russian, who were Spanish, who were from El Salvador. You name it, right? San Francisco in the 80s, where I grew up, it wasn't just a predominantly black school. It was diverse,
Yeah.
right? But the real truth was we never really ventured outside of Bayview. I always knew that there was something more to life,
Yeah.
right? And when I got to high school, it's funny, the 29 used to be the bus that would come through Dub Rock, pick me up. And then once it crossed Mission, once it got to Ingleside, where City College was, and you start going up into like St. Francis Wood, it's like that.
Different route.
Yeah, listen, and my imagination just opened up because in my mind, in my imaginative mind, that's where I live.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's where I live.
Yeah. Yeah, my mom is over on Jamestown.
Okay.
And, when she moved over there 10 years ago, I didn't have a car, so I would catch the 38 down to 25th Ave.
Okay.
And then it was, it's like one of the longest routes. And, but it's a nice route. So it's a really nice route, How did you stay on the straight and narrow? Or were you on the straight and narrow?
Oh yeah, I was.
Okay.
Because I grew up saved and sanctified and Holy Ghost filled.
Okay.
Because my grandmother was saved and sanctified.
Yeah.
And so for me, church was school. First it was home, which was family. It was school, and then it was church. Those were the three constants that I knew. More so church, because when I was introduced to faith, not religion, but relationship, through Christ Jesus, through my grandmother's example, what I believed was I had a literal faith, right? Because I didn't have anything.
Yeah.
Right? And so, God, if you exist, I went through this phase of, I'm not a bad person. I wasn't one of those disrespectful kids. That wasn't who I was. I wasn't the problematic kid, at school. I had a mouth. If you've not been able to tell, I don't have a problem talking. But I wasn't disrespectful. But that's not to say that I wasn't sneaky, because what I learned to do, being light-skinned with good hair, and I'm looking at you, and you light-skinned with good hair, is that, we learn to be sneaky. And I'm not just saying that if you light-skinned with good hair that you learn to be sneaky. I'm just saying, growing up in the church, I was that kid, and my cousin, who I love dearly, but we're opposites, he would say that he was the kid that if you told him that the stove was hot, he had to go and touch the stove. Yeah. But if you tell Javon, which is my middle name, that's what they call me, you tell him that the stove is hot, he's going to take you at his word. So I was that kid that I didn't have to go and do what you did to figure out that something wasn't right for me. I could look at you doing it and seeing the outcome and recognize that wasn't for me.
Yeah. That's what a lot of the alignment on this podcast is about. I think this podcast is perfect for, like I said, that inner city demographic. Maybe you got 1 foot in the streets, 1 foot in your purpose and passion. It's like, look around you. Everybody doing the same move, and some might be winning, but it's a lot of crash outs.
Yeah.
On the other side, right? I was talking to, I did an interview with Gunna Goes Global, and he said it's 100% failure rate in the streets, not 99, but 100. Oh. And it sounds like you had that in you, and you got that from family, school, and the church.
In church.
You still practice and heavy in the church?
I'm actually an ordained elder in the Grand Old Church of God in Christ. And so being married now and having been married for 18 years, the church is still very much an important part of my life. But I have evolved in my relationship, because in my youth, it was out of reverent fear and respect, but it was out of fear. Right? It was motivated by, I don't want to die and go to hell. Right? I don't want to die and go to hell, not because it's eternal damnation, but God, I'm living in hell. Like I don't want to be I'm living in the projects, right? And while I don't have the testimony of ever going to bed hungry, that wasn't my story, right? But I shared a room with my mother through my formative years, so I didn't have my own room, growing up. We stayed in a 2-bedroom apartment. It was my grandparents in one room and my mother and I, in the other room, right? And she had a twin bed, I had a twin bed, and going to school where I went to school, where you go through these beautiful neighborhoods and these kids are wealthy. Back then, in the 90s, that's when Pathfinder had just, came out. And I will never forget, I'm catching the bus, to school, and I'm catching the bus with joy, right? Because what else do I know?
Right.
And I get to school, and these white kids rolling up in brand new. I mean, when I brand new, I'm not talking about CarMax. No, they done went to
the dealership.
And it got the stickers and the new smell on the inside, right? Didn't make me jealous. It didn't make me envious. It put something on the inside of me that was like, I want to experience that. I want to experience that. So for me, what I learned was that the only option that I had was education. It was the only option.
And leaned into it heavy.
You know why? Because between the church and school, those were the two things that were predictable and stable in my life.
So were they escapes for you?
Oh God, yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. I was that kid who, ironic that we're sitting here talking about, inner city, kids. I was that kid who would stay after school and wouldn't go home. And I'm not talking about the kid who stayed after school an hour or so.
Yeah.
No.
6:30, 7 o'clock.
Teacher giving me a ride home.
Wow.
Because they're like, it's just not safe for you to. What? That's where I live. What do you look? You let me off at the top of the hill because it ain't safe for you to come down here. That was my experience.
Yeah.
And when I think about what was the stabilizing force, like I told you, it was education because it was predictable, right? The church was safe because it became the family that I didn't have, right? So pastors, ministers, deacons, just regular church members became examples of what I aspired for, right? What I aspired to have. I had friends who had 2-parent, households, and I was like, wow, God, like, why not me, right? Yeah. So as the kid looking from the outside in, and you have to keep in mind that this is during the time when drugs, the crack epidemic, we didn't have a war on drugs back then because it was black people. The war on drugs didn't come until it started to impact a predominantly white. So, I mean, if we're going to have the conversation, and I'm a social worker, so being a social worker, you have to be comfortable having difficult conversations and speaking truth, to power. There was the fear of being shot. Now, I didn't have sense enough to be afraid because this was all I knew, meaning my community. So I wasn't afraid of the people in my community. They weren't going to hurt me.
You ever see yourself as kind of an outcast because you're you in the projects, but you're also heavy in church and in school? What was that like? Like, because I'm thinking like fitting in, self-worth.
So I wasn't athletic. I was tall enough to be. My natural build was I should have been naturally inclined to be athletic. That didn't interest me. And it wasn't that I thought that I was better, but in my mind, I had somehow convinced myself that I didn't want to be a stereotype. I didn't want to be, the black kid who came from the hood, and so sports was going to be my escape. Not because I had a disdain for it, but I don't know. To me, it just seemed like the people that I looked up to in my life were never those people who were professional athletes because they weren't tangible, right? The people that I looked up to were people like my grandfather. I looked up to my pastor, not just because he was a man of God, but because he was a black man who was taking care of his family. James Taylor. Mr. Taylor was my principal at the school. I looked up to him. You know, 11 years old, Toby Levine and her husband, Jerry Levine. Jerry just passed a few weeks ago. White, Jewish couple, in their late 80s. Jerry was 94. They adopted me and saw something in me and then invested in me. And I didn't become one of those kids who was, because they're white and I'm black, right? That, oh, you were a token, you were a charity case, you were somebody that, that they felt, no, they didn't have any kids.
Yeah.
She saw potential in me and invested in me. When I got ready to go off to college, she gave me money to buy books. And when she found out that I got a full ride through the Omega Boys Club, it was, well, we're going to send you this because we want to make sure that you're supported. When I got ready to buy my first house, I didn't have family members that I could go to.
Yeah.
Right? I called them not asking for anything other than some advice, right? Because now don't get it twisted, because you were saying, were you picked on? Yeah, being called faggot because I wasn't the traditional masculine,
hyper masculine,
and it's so interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because I say, they would call me that, but then in the same breath, they respected me. That's what my mother would say. You can't worry about them niggas. Yeah. You can't worry about, What my mother couldn't understand, though, was that when they say, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt, that's a lie.
And then a lot of the time, my mom used to say it to me all the time. I'll be like, your words broke me down last night.
Listen,
it was you.
I'd rather you hit me.
Oh, yeah.
Because even as a professional working in the field of mental health, one of the things that I'm constantly helping my clients do is work through the narratives of words.
Yeah.
Right? So when we talk about trauma, most people think about the big T, which is like, oh, somebody got shot.
Yeah.
Somebody got hit by a car. Well, but it's the little traumas, which are when people called you ugly, or they called you fat, or, they called you, oh, you're a faggot, right? And you end up spending your life trying to dispel, and you don't even have the ability, you may not have the words to articulate that you're trying to deconstruct something, but the reality is you spend your life trying to prove that you're not that.
Yeah. And then, sounds like the younger it happens to you,
oh God,
the more it's gonna sit and resonate with you, And I've been in situations where I'm not doing so hot in school, or I'm having a hard time at work, and I'm thinking about what so-and-so said to me when I was 8 years old.
Oh, yeah.
Like, why is that happening? Like, what is that? What kind of response is that? Why does that response happen?
We call that a trauma response. It's a trigger, right? And I think that, one of the things that we as black men, very few of us have had situations where it has been safe to be vulnerable, right? And so it's interesting because when I came into the world of mental health, and you start learning, these terms, and you start learning theory, right? And they start talking about vulnerable populations, right? When you hear vulnerable, what is the first thing that comes to your mind?
Weak,
right? So here it is. We talk about vulnerability and we see it as weakness, right? But when you think about what vulnerability is really about taking risk.
Willful weakness, if you will.
I wouldn't even say that it's weakness. I'll give you an example, and it was probably one of the best examples that I heard of vulnerability being described. If you have someone who has cancer, and the doctor tells you that there are a few options that we have. We can aggressively treat it with chemotherapy and radiation, or we can do absolutely nothing. Now, if we do absolutely nothing, the outcome will be that the cancer can become malignant and it can spread, and ultimately you will succumb to cancer. We can treat the cancer, but we can't guarantee you what the results are going to be.
Gotta roll the dice and see what we can get.
Right. Vulnerability is taking that risk, not being assured of what the outcome is. So you think about somebody that you know who has had cancer and has gone through bouts with chemo and radiation. Do you see that person as somebody who's weak?
Not at all.
Right? Because what they're doing is they're taking the risk to allow a foreign substance to come in contact with their body without any ability to be able to speak with assurance and certainty about what that outcome is, right? But vulnerability is also the birthplace for connection and relationship, right? And so I think that for young men, and especially for black men, we've never really learned how to form safe relationships, right? It's never really been safe.
Yeah.
You know, we talk a lot about, you know, women and girls being objectified. Men are objectified too.
Yeah.
You know, growing up in the hood, the objectification was, you know, your worth was based on how masculine or how hard you were.
I've also found that not just your masculinity will be called into question, but your blackness.
Oh yeah.
If you soft, you're not black enough.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And you know, there's this idea of just like this monolithic structure of who black men are. I work with kids now, and I think it's way better. There's way more freedom socially, social acceptance around being a black skateboarder, being a black nerd, being a black thespian, right? And not just hooping and posting up.
Yeah.
You feel me? So I definitely had that experience too. And like you said, it weighs on you.
Oh yeah.
The self-worth, it's like, what am I?
You know, one of the things that I have struggled with, and I've been blessed. I mean, my journey from high school took me to Tuskegee University, you know, and I was able to go there thanks to Dr. Joseph Marshall and the Omega Boys, you know, Boys Club. Transferred from there and completed at Azusa Pacific, where I got a bachelor's in psychology, and then ended up going to the University of Southern California, USC, got a master's in social work, and then worked for the Department of Children and Family Services for Los Angeles County, which is the second largest child welfare organization in the United States.
Behind
New York.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So here it is, this kid from the ghetto who didn't have any examples, you know, meaning I didn't have tangible examples within my own family, right, of people who had done what I was trying to pursue. And my wife and I have talked about how the hardest thing is trying to forge and make your way in a space of the unknown.
Yes. I have no examples in front of me, and I'm just rolling the dice. I'm just trying to figure it out. What's going to stick, what's not going to stick. Personally, for me, in my early 30s, and you know, one of the good things that's working out is that in a lot of men's spaces, this is like the second market. Like I know guys who graduated college and worked at Genentech, accountants, right? Thinking about law school, but then it's like, man, I don't want to do that right now. I kind of want to work with kids. Kind of want to coach. I kind of want to work on cars, or you know, or so like I'm in a space right now to where I'm kind of blending in, and it's working. Yeah, I spent most of my 20s kind of figuring out what is it that I want to do, and just dealing with the pressure of trying to move forward. I knew school wasn't for me. My senior year, I was like, hey, I'm gonna go. But right now, I kind of just want to work and stack. And I'm going to do that for a couple of years and then go back to school. A couple of years turn into 8 years. And so by the time I'm 26, I found my passion. I found my craft. I'm doing well. But I'm hitting glass ceiling after glass ceiling because I don't have that degree.
Yeah.
And then it's like, I come from the corporate world, which actually helped me do well in school, meeting deadlines and just a different level of discipline.
Yeah.
I'm in class with, 18, 19-year-olds who snickering. They fresh out of high school, and I'm trying to make something of myself, but I'm having to deal with being in those baby steps, and I feel like I don't need to be in those baby steps now.
Oh yeah.
And then watching you know, my friend get accepted into this master's program, and then this person just, you know, they got funding to start their own family resource center, and then this is popping off, and I'm still like, man, I don't really know what to do. And then I think around the pandemic, shifted things for a lot of people. It taught me what was really important, and you know, a lot of just seeing what people are leaning into now. It's kind of like, well, when I get into my career and I'm 6, 7 years in, and I get bored, am I going to be one of these people that stops and, you know, turns into pursuing their passions? Because I had 2 friends, they were both accountants, successful in their 20s, and then they stopped to work on cars, and they're both doing well. And it's like, how do I find my lane now without having to go through that?
So it's interesting because several things come to mind for me. One, when I look at the people that I know in my life, friends that I've made over the years, who came from situations where it just kind of seemed carefree, right?
Yeah.
So during my generation, a lot of people were like, hey, I'm going to go to college, and then after graduation, I'm going to take a year off and backpack, you know, across, you know,
Sure.
Europe.
Yeah.
What you doing? I got to get a job,
Seriously.
right? A job,
Yeah.
because I got these student loans, and I need a job. But what I've recognized and what I've realized, and it's so funny, is that for many of them, they came from situations where, while I don't believe anyone's upbringing and background is perfect, right? There was structure and there was support. There was also the freedom for them to be able to be a child. When I look at how I was raised, and I can't speak for you, I became an adult before I should have become an adult, right? And it's so interesting because in Black households, we'll tell our kids, stay in a child's place.
Yes, sir.
But the opposite side of that is,
I'm helping with the bills. Like, what you mean?
are we putting our children in situations where it's not okay for them to be a child and they have to be an adult? Or, in my case, and I had this conversation with my mother, and it was really, really tough for her to kind of accept. I said, you know, parents can't tell children, you don't get to tell your children what their experience was being raised by you. You can't tell me that because you were doing the best that you could, right? And I can respect and I can accept, you know, that that's your truth. But I don't have to give you a pass because of how your best may have impacted me.
So it's funny you just said that, because what I'm seeing a lot on like Instagram and like just social media in general is Black men in particular confronting their mothers in particular, not so much their fathers. No. Not to say that, you know, fathers across a whole generation, you know, were perfect, but, you know, mom was the one who stayed. Thank you for staying. This is what my experience was like. And then I know a couple of Black men around my age that they just can't have that conversation with I can't have that conversation with my mom. I got to bottle this up because I know what it would do to her. And can you talk about like your experience or what you've seen where Black men are kind of balancing that? Something has to be said. I got to speak my truth, but I'm also extremely grateful that you stuck around.
Oh, yeah. So like I told you, for men, and especially for Black men, the only emotion that we are so used to being validated in is anger, right? Anger. When you talk about these young brothers who are confronting their mothers and they're talking about, well, where's the father? He ain't there. He ain't around, right? But I can be angry and upset with mom because no matter what I tell my mama, she gonna still be there.
Right.
I can't go and tell that to my father, possibly, because I'm going to suffer another injury.
Yeah.
Because what has been his go-to? To leave,
Right.
To abandon, right? So the other thing too is, and this was my experience. I was my mother's emotional husband. And so for many young Black men, and for many, you know, men of color, or no matter what walk of life you're from, but since we're talking about Black, we become our mother's emotional husbands.
Man, enmeshment.
Oh yeah, and the emotional husband, is I'm supposed to meet every need that the man who broke your heart didn't. I believe that one of the reasons why I didn't have a relationship with my father, I did hold, and I until this day, I have forgiven her, but it doesn't change the fact that my mother didn't fight for me to have a relationship with him because he broke her heart. Right? I'm gonna raise my son.
You think there was like intentional alienation?
Yeah, there was because she was hurt.
Yeah.
And see, this is the conversation that parents don't, want to have, whether it be, a single mother or a single father.
Right.
Depending on what that relationship is with that other parent and what that parent did to you, it takes a huge person and a mature person to be able to say, you know what, we didn't work out, but we have this child. How are we going to co-parent, right? Because we've created this life and they need both of us.
Do you have any success stories about parents who are able to put their shit to the side and show up for their kids?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, a good friend of mine grew up in a situation where the parents just didn't see eye to eye. They didn't work out, But you know what they loved? They loved that kid.
Yeah.
Right? So it was about the kid knows that mommy and daddy ain't together. They don't live together, but we come together. We may even spend holidays together. And it's not that we're putting on a front, right? But it was important to the parents and it was important to the kid, that the kid had the opportunity to be able to say that they're spending the holiday with a parent. So the parents are just like, okay, well, we need to figure out what this is going to look like.
In your opinion, what are some things that make that process easier?
Maturity.
Maturity. Do you think a financial, being financially free kind of helps that? Like, do you see a difference in?
No, because I don't think, listen, I grew up poor. I'm not poor anymore. And I don't say that boastfully, but I say that to kind of go back to something that I was going to say earlier. The struggle that I had was when I made it out of the hood, that no one ever taught me how to be proud of what I had accomplished, right? So I use the example with my clients that if you have Jamal and you got Jerome, Jamal is trying to do the right thing. Jamal is trying to, for him, he may have identified that school is what he's going to do, right? So he's trying to go to school because that's going to be his way to get out. Jamal's not getting the support that it is that he needs. But Jerome is acting an ass and cutting up, in and out of trouble. Jerome may have even gone to jail, right? And I told my mother this. I said, it's my opinion, and I'm sharing my opinion from my truth, right? Because I know that people will hear this and say, oh, well, you can't generalize everybody. I'm giving you my opinion, my truth. I feel like some black people are able to support dysfunction. It's almost like we have PhDs and masters in being able to support dysfunction. Jerome done went to jail. Oh, we know exactly what to do. We got to get together and be down at 850 Bryant or be down to San Bruno, waiting in line because he need that visit. We got to send him a care package. We gonna get him the latest Jordans. And I've always wondered, where the hell is he going so that he can take that picture against that painted wall?
Yeah. Oh God. That.
Right? But here it is. Jamal don't get no support. Oh, Jamal is going to be okay. Here's the thing. Jamal has no choice but to be okay because what we've taught Jamal is that he can't depend on anybody but himself.
The burden of being a high performer.
Oh, yeah.
I was talking to my wife about that. And that's what I was going through. Social emotional groups. We're going to give it to all these kids that need it. But, this black kid, now you cool.
Oh, yeah.
He's good. You got two parents, now you good. Like, you don't know what he's going through. Yeah, that's definitely a big one. The need to be trauma informed, right? Going back to your experience, you were social work in LA County, right? Mm-hmm. You've probably heard and seen some of the craziest stuff. Can you talk about like your ability in being trauma informed and having to transform mostly adult mindsets as to why this mother did X, Y, and Z to her kids.
So, really quickly, just to close the loop on the last comment, I don't believe that finances makes you a good parent. Because I grew up poor and I had love.
Yeah.
Wasn't perfect, but it was love. And I think that for some people, maybe people who are well-resourced and they have access to finances and so on and so forth, that doesn't excuse them from impacting their children with a life of trauma. They're just able to cover it up better because they have the financial resources to make it look, as my daughters say, aesthetic.
Yeah.
Right?
How old are your kids?
My kids are 9 and 12, so I have 2 girls.
Okay.
9 and 12.
It's funny because I'm December 9th.
Okay.
9.
So, but to answer your question, when we talk about trauma, right, you can't expect. Now, I know some people who have been traumatized, who have gone through hell and back.
Yeah.
But they are phenomenal parents. They are phenomenal people, right? Some of them have done their own work, whether it be through therapy or other means. Some of them who have not, just had a strong determination to be better than what they had.
Yeah.
Right? But I'm going to tell you the other side that people don't talk about, which is even as someone who is well educated, who's trauma informed, right? So trauma informed just simply means that you understand that people are impacted by trauma. And so the modalities or the treatments that you use or the methods that you use in order to help guide them to a place of healing or maybe to even find some grounding, right? Are techniques that don't necessarily put them in a situation where you are directly dealing with the trauma. So for example, when I worked in juvenile justice, we did trauma informed. So here it is, you have these young boys, black and brown, and these young girls who are locked up pretty much in kid jail.
Yeah.
Many of them come from broken families where they've experienced sexual abuse, they've experienced abandonment. You're not going to have a group of 10 boys sitting in a circle, right? And we're talking about, so what was it like when someone touched you?
Right.
That's not trauma informed. That's triggering. That's ignorance. That's dangerous, right? Why is that dangerous? Because you're opening them up to talk about things in an environment where it may not be safe, right? And then you're sending them back into the camp that they have to live in, right? Wearing that. Everybody know, right? Trauma informed is to be able to have an awareness of what the trauma is that someone has experienced, and you provide them treatment and support to be able to cope and move through those things so that they have some sort of stability and some sort of grounding. So there's a difference, right? I found myself triggered as a parent because my children are experiencing what I never experienced.
I was going to touch on that.
My children wake up every day.
Yeah.
They've had their own, they've only lived in a house, right? When my wife, funny story, but when my wife told me that she was pregnant, I told her, I say, so you wait until we get ready to sell this house to get pregnant, right? Like she had did it on her own, because we had bought our first house, and at the time that we had bought the first house, first of all, we shouldn't have been able to qualify for that house.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say that it was Jesus, it was God. That's what I'm gonna say it is. Yeah. Some other people might say, it was just whatever you reported you was making at the time. This was in 2006.
Okay.
But we sold our house. We sold our house and moved into an apartment. And when I found out that my wife was triggered, here we are moving from a 4-bedroom home into a 2-bedroom apartment. And I got triggered. Because I was like, no, I can't bring my kid up, and I can't have my baby born in the same situation that I was in. Now, granted, the apartment that I was moving into in Santa Clarita did not look like Double Rock.
Yeah, sure.
Right? But for me, it was the mindset, right? It was the mindset of for me, we had our own place. So look, here it is. Can you hear my, look, so clear, that tells you my generation. I done bought these doggone Oakley glasses and I touched them
Whoa, did you just turn the volume down?
and I turned the volume down.
Wow.
Yeah.
Technology.
So here it is. We're moving into this place, and all I can think about is I'm going to be starting my generational curse.
Repeating the cycle.
Right? Because for me, living with my grandparents was because my mom couldn't afford to live and have her own place.
The parental inadequacy.
Well, it wasn't because my mama worked.
Yeah.
But the problem was when the people decided they wanted to sell the house, if you can't afford to buy the house, then what? You got to go.
Right.
So for me, it was I never wanted to be in a situation where somebody could come and tell me that I have to leave. But if I buy a house, I wasn't even thinking about foreclosure, because that was, right? Long story short, bought our first house, sold it, moved into this apartment. We had bought a second house. The house was supposed to close on a particular day, and they start running games. They start playing games. So here my wife is 9 months pregnant. We are homeless, living with a friend. Living with a friend because we're waiting to move into our house. Now, this is where that light skin with good hair had to go back to Double Rock, but in a very corporate sort of way when I went into, the funding office. Got my tires slashed.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Went to the lending office, got my tires slashed, but walked out of there with the keys to my house.
Wow.
A slashed tire, right? But when my baby was born a week later, and she was brought from the hospital, she was brought to her own room. And so she's always had her own room. So my point is, I found myself triggered because my kids have their own room. There's never been a time where they've had to share a space with anybody. And if they are sharing a space, it's because they decide they wanted to sleep in their sister's room, right? That was important to me. My kids wake up on Christmas Day and both of their parents, are there.
I was just talking to my wife about that.
Parent-teacher conferences.
Yeah, pulling up.
What? What's that?
Do you think you ever have to overcompensate with your kid's school just to show them that we not typical black folks y'all gonna run game on?
Oh yeah. Yeah, of course. My wife is also a therapist.
Do y'all lead with y'all credentials, or do you kind of let people fill it out?
No. My children, I have two black girls, and my daughters make it very, very clear, that what's your dad's name? Dr. Smith. If you meet my dad, you call him Dr. Smith. You don't call him by his first name. Right? At the end of the day, I'm still Jackey.
Yeah.
Right? I'm Jackey. When people ask me, who are you? I'm Jackey. But you're Dr. Listen, I'm Jackey. When I go home, I'm Shavrin's husband. When my grandmother was living, I was baby. My grandma ain't never called me doctor, but the one time that we had to lead with credential was because my oldest goes to private school. She goes to a private Christian school, and there is an absence of diversity. So because we've been able to afford to give our children a certain life, it's also come with deficits, right? So it's come with the deficit of diversity. It's come with the deficit of representation in large amount, of people who look like them, right? So there have been some instances where there has been some racism. There have been some instances where there has been the use of people utilizing their privilege in a way that was not appropriate. And so, I'm the parent. I normally let my wife take care of things. I show up.
It's a problem.
When it's a problem. So I'm the parent that sends the emails. And so most of the time when I send the email, I'm sending it from work. And so my work already has the
signature.
Yeah. And I'm going to tell you that particular situation, the response and the tone was very, very different. And then when I showed up to the school to have the conversation, and it wasn't a disrespectful conversation, it was a conversation like we're having right now, right? But it was, okay, well, so let's kind of explore what your thinking was and why you thought that was appropriate to either say or do to my child, and the impact that you didn't take into consideration that that would have, on her. So now, even if these people are not Pentecostal, they all of a sudden start speaking in tongues because they stutter, right? But no, we don't lead with our credentials, because at the end of the day, I'm Jackey. When I die, people may say, oh, he obtained this and so on and so forth. There are three things that I want people to be able to say. And when I say people, I mean my children and my wife. That he loved our mother, he loved God, and my daddy loved me. I don't need them to say that I was Dr. So-and-so, because people get enamored with who they think you are and your status. And a pastor that I had years ago said, don't allow your gift to take you where your integrity can't keep you. And I think that that's a different topic, but I think that that's one of the issues that we have in the church, is that for many people, church is the only place that I know where folks can't really be honest about who they are, because we fall in love with the ideal of who we think you are. Yeah. And then when you have a fall from grace, you can't really recover. So I'm Jackey. I'm Dr. Smith when I'm getting paid to be Dr. Smith.
I like it. One of the things that's come up, I guess I've been challenged with is, this is a young men's space, and it's like someone was like, what guidance and directives do you have for young men to show up better in relationships?
Okay.
What, as a mental health specialist, what would you say or recommend or like walk through? What do you need to do before you enter the dating market? What are some things that you need to? Because I'm telling you, I had to let a lot go, and I've said this is probably my fourth interview that I've said this with. I had to let a lot of things go, and I had to. It's literally like woman after woman was like, "Can you calm down? Because when you get mad, you get really, really mad." Right? But growing up with four brothers and two parents, and we in the projects too, is the mental warfare that you're under. I'm talking week-long silent treatments.
You gotta fight.
Exactly. So, in your experience, your expertise, what are some things that young men should lean into before they hit the dating market?
I would love to be able to sit here and tell you that I have the formula. But what I've recognized and what I realized in this work is that we are all broken people who come into situations, and when we come into relationships, we replay what was the example that we had. Yeah. Right? So granted, there are things that we know that we don't want to do like our parents, right? But it's the other things that we don't recognize as being toxic.
Right.
It is the other things that we don't recognize as being unhealthy, that maybe our spouse or our partner identifies. And then when they bring it to our attention, or when that part of you shows up in a space that it shouldn't have showed up, like work. Right? Yeah. Because what I see with a lot of young men that I work with is they don't know how, and I hate this term, they don't know how to code switch. I hate that term.
I hate it too.
I hate that term.
I do. I tell my kids, don't code switch, just have it all in the same code.
Right?
Yeah.
So what I say is you have to understand how to show up and what's appropriate for the space that you're in. Right? So many of the young men that I've worked with, think that, I should be able to, this is how I talk. This is, okay, I understand that is how you talk. I understand that is a component of your personality. That's where you're from. But you're going into a space where people expect you to conform because this is the posture of said space, right? So for example, if you go and meet the President of the United States, I don't care who you are, right? There is some protocol that you are expected to, they expect you to dress a certain way. They expect you to behave a certain way, because if you get a little froggy and you looking like the Secret Service is all over you, right? But when you come from a background where who you are is your trauma response, because this is what you've had to, this is how you've had to show up in order to survive, and now someone is telling you that who you are is not good enough for where you want to go, right? That begins to deconstruct and open Pandora's box, right? Because when people see me, they may see someone who's really well put together because I dress well, smell good, I got my own thing, going on. But when we begin to kind of remove the layers of who I am as an individual, now you're exposed to my vulnerabilities. Yeah. And so if it's never been safe for me to kind of have that space, I don't even know how to, right? I don't know how to exist in that.
Yeah.
So what I know as far as a relationship with a significant other, is what was shown to me. Yeah. Right? The examples that I had in my life, I had a variety of different examples of relationships. My grandfather, had 7 kids, and he told me, I said, Grandpa, how did you stay married for 60 years? My grandfather looked at me and he says, my daddy didn't leave me, so I wasn't leaving my kids. I said, but Grandpa, Grandma was a piece of, he said, yeah, I know. He said, your mama was a piece of work, yeah. He said, but I made a vow to God before I made a vow to her. And my grandfather was not a religious man. He was a PK. His daddy was a Baptist preacher, but my grandfather wasn't church going. He found Jesus on his transition out of here, So he wasn't that guy. But he was a person who believed that being a man means that you take care of your responsibility.
Duty first.
Right? And so I think that where a lot of our young men are struggling is they don't know who they are because they don't have any examples that are healthy to be able to attach to.
Yeah. And I think that manifests itself in the dating market more so in the short term and kind of just trying to run your body count up as a man to assert some sort of dominance there.
I'm a therapist. It's okay. No, I'm just. No, I'm
about to say we could. Hold on, wait a minute. I have to get an after hours.
I'm about to. And
that's funny. But when I think about relationships, there's the aspect of me being a male mammal and wanting quantity and variety, but then there's also like, I'm with a good woman. I love my wife, and I feel franchised. I feel like I'm connected to something bigger than me, right? I've been in situations where I don't mind crashing out. I don't mind being in a space that's not conducive for my mental health, for productivity. But now I'm responsible for at least one other person.
That's right.
I have to put my best foot forward.
What does she create for you that makes you feel?
The first thing that comes to mind is authenticity.
Okay.
Being myself. I'm a nerd. I'm a nerdy guy. We can get back from the club and we're gonna play some Jeopardy.
Okay.
We're gonna watch an ant documentary or something like that. And I couldn't really do that when I just felt like my experience in the dating market before her was very performative. You know what I'm saying? It's like I have to wear this persona. Personas can be faked.
Oh, yeah.
They are not personalities. They are not true characters.
She makes you feel safe.
There's a safe, yes.
So in allowing you to be who you are, she also doesn't weaponize your vulnerability. So it goes back to that vulnerability. So when we talk about, I think that because we are men, we are visually stimulated by what it is that we see.
Yeah.
Right? The problem is many brothers have missed good women.
Yeah.
Because they want, your generation is different because we didn't have TikTok,
Tinder,
Instagram, we didn't. I was the generation of when the internet came out. I mean, I had dial-up, AOL.
Yeah. We're literally shopping. When you're on a date, you're shopping.
Oh yeah, you would swipe.
Yeah,
swiping.
Same thing you do on IKEA.com, Target.com. You're shopping.
I think that the other thing that we don't have time to really talk about is the generational differences and the challenges that young people and men are put in the age of social media, right? So if you've not learned, I was the last generation that played outside, right? So we are that generation that, you know how you all are Facebook gangsters
Yep.
and y'all who bang through social media and so on and so forth. I'm the generation that we gonna pull up. I'm the generation
to the schoolhouse.
Listen,
Wherever.
you know, it's that saying "f around
Yeah.
and find out."
Yeah.
We are the poster children of "f around and find out," right? Because we not gonna. Oh, you blocking us? Do you not recognize that we still write in cursive and we have the ability to read a map?
Yeah. Cursive is dead.
We will find
Yeah.
you.
Yes.
You see that?
Crazy.
We were latchkey children. But my point in saying that, you know, with humor is there are obstacles that your generation has to battle that we didn't, right? So we had to learn confidence. We had to learn self-esteem. Even if you had low self-esteem, like if you like somebody, you know, I don't know if you work in the school, so well, I don't know, because maybe they be sending text messages in the school. When I was growing up, do you like me? Yes or no? Like a little box, right?
Yeah. I think there's that aspect of us having the different. I think one of the biggest thing that comes from that is like this false sense of options.
That's it.
We all got way too many options, and it's like I'm gonna pick this person, and or I'm gonna get this person. I know I got more options behind them, and that's what I was really talking about, like in the sense of shopping.
Oh yeah.
You buy these shoes, you don't like them, take them back to Foot Locker and get another pair. And I think that's kind of
I prefer Nordstrom's.
yeah,
Do you know why?
because it was cheaper.
No, because if you have shoes from Nordstrom, you have them 10 years. They can be
that's funny.
worn over, and
That's
it's
funny.
true.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
can take them back and be like, I got these from here. I don't have
Oh,
a
really?
receipt.
Like that?
Yes.
90 days later, scuffed up.
Years.
Oh wow.
That's what makes Nordstrom. You're a nerd, right?
Yeah.
So explore the business model of Nordstrom. What makes Nordstrom so much different than some other places, right? It's the quality of service. It's the experience, right? I agree with you. My wife is the best thing, you know, one of the best things to ever happen, you know, to me, right? Because she loves me with all my flaws. I think that what young brothers fail to understand is that when you find a good woman or a good partner, they're not falling in love with the ideal of you. They're falling in love with the potential that you have to be more than what you are.
Right.
Right? But here's the thing. If all you've ever been is an emotional husband for your mother, then what you've learned is that your purpose is to make sure somebody else's needs are being met.
Right.
Right? But when you come into healthy relationship says, I value you.
Yeah. Regardless.
And I know that I'm not going to be okay unless you okay.
Right.
Now, you know, you got me over here drinking this this
Filtered.
water like we in Club Shay Shay.
It's filtered.
You know, oh, okay, thank you.
Straight from Brita.
You know, but
No, I mean, I think that men are, I mean, just a better, different version of themselves when they're in good company. And I think when you're in a strong, healthy relationship, you don't really have room to fuck up the way you was fucking up years ago.
But that's maturity.
Right.
And that is when you as a man have crossed over from a boy to a man because you recognize I've invested too much. And I'm not talking about financial investment, but I've invested too much of my heart. I've invested too much of my vulnerability. And here's the thing, while she may not be perfect, she might be perfect for you because she's going to love you in a way that you can't love yourself.
Right.
Right? And it goes beyond, you know, physical intimacy. As a man, you know, my grandfather and my grandparents always said that my grandfather said, man is simple. A man needs a cold drink, and this is what I say in therapy, a warm plate, and a hot box. That's what my grandfather used to say. Now, see, that's a wisdom that you can't get from a university. I'm going to say it again for the people who, in the back. A man needs a cold drink, a warm plate, and a hot box.
I like it.
Right? Now, like I said, I use humor, right? But what my grandfather was essentially saying is that we are simple. We become complex because social media has created this artificial sense of what it means to be successful, what it means to be a man, right? You know, because people only post what they want you to see, the version of themselves that they want you to see, right? Yeah. But if you have a fragile ego, which is the entirety of how you see yourself, you're always going to compare your worth and your value to what it is that you see, you know, there, which is unattainable because it's not reality. It may not even be the reality for these influencers, right? But you get into a relationship, one of the things that I'm sure that you found, you know, in the time that you've been married, is that as much as you love your wife, you all have conflict.
Yeah.
Right? But if we've been taught that conflict is bad, right, we have to change our narrative and our understanding. Conflict is not bad. Conflict opens the door for us to get insight and understanding, right? But it takes us to be in a space to be able to hear that and not interpret it through the filter of, you try to disrespect me.
Right. Right. And it takes a lot of clarity to practice the reflection of, I need to see it as something other than I'm being disrespected right now.
That's right.
And I'm fortunate enough to have had that clarity and that reflection, which drives it forward.
Yeah.
When we first met, you did, let's say, like a 5 to 7 minute exercise on grief. Are you able to do that process again for my listeners?
I'm trying to think. Do you remember what we did?
I think we had lost a young person at our clubhouse, and I think you had us envision this person and all the good qualities that they have. I can't really remember, but I know it was really powerful.
So I'll tell you that grief and loss, grief, we always associate that with death. Many of us are walking around grieving the loss of what we never had.
Yeah.
Many of us are grieving, you know, the loss of not being affirmed, not being validated, not being loved, right? And for some people, when they hear that, they're like, I don't need it. Everybody needs, listen, as a social worker, I stand on this pillar that everybody needs a warm, safe, secure, nurturing environment. We have been created as human beings to need that in order to survive. We were not created to live as isolates on an island. But when we begin to talk about grief, it also comes back to vulnerability, right? And many of us have not been given the permission, or we don't even know how to grieve because it's never been safe, right? It's never really been safe to grieve. Sometimes we see grief as, oh, somebody done died at the funeral, the person screaming and so on and so forth. That's grief, but that's also guilt.
How does guilt get tied into that?
That's guilt. Because in some cases, it can be guilt in that you didn't do what you should have did for this person when they were alive. And now you have to live the rest of your life knowing that you can never make right what you had the opportunity to make right, but you didn't. Because it was pride, because it was unresolved anger, right? Or for whatever, reason. I've seen this numerous of times growing up in the church and going to many of funerals. Big Mama done died, and the one that Big Mama would call to come and see never had time, right? Now you the one falling out and we got to pick you up,
right?
Because you so consumed with grief. No, that's guilt, right? But I want to share with your listeners that grief is like thinking about a visitor, right? I want you to envision in your mind someone who could come to your home completely unannounced, and they'd knock on the door, and without question, you'd open the door and just let them come on in, right? Who might that person be for you?
My boy Ronnie.
Okay.
He lived with me for about 8 years.
Okay, so we doing an interview right now.
Yeah.
Ronnie pop up, knock on the door, you pause, you let him in, right?
Yeah.
He's gonna sit down for a little while. You may chop it up. Ronnie's gonna get up and eventually leave, right? Believe it or not, grief is the same way. Grief will come and it will knock, and what we do is we resist it. Is we'll sit there, we'll say, no, not today. No, I'm not messing with you. You ain't, it's like when we grew up in the projects, we had peepholes. Or, you cut off all the lights. Now, mind you, folks done seen you cut off the lights and you go to the window to look out the window like you didn't just, okay?
Exactly.
But grief will show up, and rather than opening the door and allowing grief to come in, we start to put these restrictions on grief. Oh no, you can't come here. So what ends up happening? Grief waits until you in a situation where you at work, maybe getting ready to do a presentation, you on a date, with this, this fine person that you dating, and next thing you know, you hear something, you smell something, right? Trigger memory, right? Sensory memory. And grief says, oh, I told your ass you should have just let me come on and sit down when I wanted to. So now I'm going to sit right here in your lap in the middle of this situation. But if we allow grief to come in and sit with us for a moment, it will get up and it'll walk away. Now, that's not to say that grief, is never going to not visit us, right? But grief is not a bad thing. It is a reminder, that we're still human, right? One of the things that I think that we as people may forget is I loved my grandparents, and both of them have passed away. My grandfather passed in 2005. My grandmother passed in 2020. They have been gone for a very long time, but I promise you that the way that I feel for them, the attachment, the connection that I have to them in my heart and in my soul didn't change because they died. We've kind of tried to negotiate and figure out that because a person has passed away or they're not there anymore, that we shouldn't, why are we still crying and it's been 15 years later?
Right.
That's attachment.
Yeah.
And attachment is defined as a lifelong enduring connection. It doesn't die. Think about someone that you were close to that has passed away. Do you feel any less for that person today than you did when they were walking around?
Right. Same feelings garnered.
Right?
Yeah.
That's attachment.
Right.
And I think that for many of our young brothers, especially here in San Francisco, this is a tough city.
Facts. Does attachment become unhealthy?
Oh, yes.
When does attachment become unhealthy?
Attachment becomes unhealthy when the attachment is codependent, right? Meaning that you are dependent upon someone else. You can't do anything without this person.
Yeah.
But they love me. Attachment becomes unhealthy when it becomes manipulative, right? And for many of our young men and for many of the men that I work with, a lot of them have been abused sexually. So here it is. What I really want is just to have a relationship. I want somebody to love me. But you've garnered my trust and I've opened my heart up to you and I trust you because you've demonstrated, you've shown me that you're somebody that I can trust. So now I've become attached to you. But the things that you want me to do or the things that you're trying to do to me are not things that you would necessarily do.
Yeah, they don't serve me.
They don't serve me, they serve you.
Yeah.
Attachment also becomes really, really unhealthy when individuals are not able to make decisions outside of the individual. Going back to that Because I thought earlier when you were going to talk about on social media,
Yeah.
I'm seeing this big trend of people talk about the narcissistic parents. And I'm like, people, please get an understanding of what these terms are before you just start.
Yeah, I actually told one of my students, I was like, narcissism comes with a real diagnosis. You can't just be throwing them around like that. But what you were just saying, unhealthy attachment, I've seen it in enmeshed children, that mother to son, or typically youngest son, and when her relationship is not going well, that unhealthy attachment. And at times, they can't stand each other. But I don't know how to walk this earth without this person.
Oh, yeah, because here's the thing. I've created a situation where I've reinforced your thinking that you can't. That you have what we call learned helplessness, right? And the thing is, it doesn't serve the child, it serves the parent, right? Parenting is tough. It's not for the faint of heart, right? And we oftentimes, see the emotional parent role, with, or the emotional, spouse in the relationship between single mothers and their sons, right? Because these sons become the ideal men that you want.
Like, I'm building my son.
It's like Build-A-Bear.
Outfits, language,
affection.
Yeah.
Right. I worked with someone who was so severely abused by their mother that they had begun to engage in a sexual relationship, and they didn't have the wherewithal to recognize that that was not appropriate.
Yeah.
Right. So when you were asking me about my work,
that's just the life. Are you good?
With children in Southern California, in the child welfare system.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I one case in particular comes to mind where a young woman wasn't even 16 yet, and she was pregnant by her father.
Wow.
And had a baby. And when we hear things like that, I'm just going to say in my community, the black community, the first thing we say is, well, it wasn't one of us. Actually, it was. It was. And then you find that the father had a history of trauma.
Yeah.
That was unaddressed.
Yeah.
So it becomes a generational curse that has never been addressed, right? And here's the thing. Dysfunction isn't really dysfunction if this is what is normal. If this is what you perceive and you understand to be normal.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't get spankings when I grew up. We got whoopings. When I became a social worker and I got my job with DCFS, I remember sitting in our train and they were going through with child abuse. I picked up the phone and called my mom. I said, Mom, do you know you're supposed to have a case?
Yeah. Yes. Seriously.
I said,
seriously.
You're supposed to have
a lot of them.
Right? But here's the thing. A lot of that abuse that was communicated as discipline, people say, oh, it comes from slavery. No, it came from, we didn't have any other option and we didn't know any other way. And I'll tell you, most times when parents start to whoop their kids, do you know what that really comes from?
Fear? Anger?
Anger. Because you've exhausted all resources that you have and your ability to try and curb the behavior of the child. So you're now resorting to hitting them. And that is always in anger. Right? So I couldn't understand, when I would hear people say, well, I whoop their ass, because I love them.
Yeah.
I understand what you're trying to say, right? But I don't ever remember getting a butt whooping and my mother sitting there saying, oh, honey, I love you, and I just want you to be all right.
Yeah.
No, my mother was saying some things, going back to what you were saying earlier.
Sticks and stones.
Listen, that I sometimes find myself curled up in the corner, rocking back and forth. It's funny, and this is disclosure, but You know, someone had posted yesterday on Facebook, and they said, what is a memory or something that you have that takes you back to your childhood? And for me, it's Jergens lotion. The smell of original Jergens lotion sends me back to a space that was very traumatic. Very traumatic. And it's so funny because going back to about grief and how we can be triggered, I was in a foreign country. I was on a tour with my wife. We had gone to Europe. I will never forget, we were walking around the Coliseum, and I was like, man, I'm from the projects, from the city. Yeah. Like, I read about this, and I'm here now, right? So I'm just, I mean, I'm taking it in. And out of nowhere, someone starts putting this lotion on, and the wind caught it. And I remember, you know, walking, and all of a sudden I just froze. You know, and my wife was like, babe, are you okay? I said, somebody got Jergens lotion. Now, granted, she knows because we've talked about, you know, what that incident was, you know, for me. And for me, you know, it wasn't a sexual abuse. It was seeing someone that I love be stabbed. And before they were stabbed, the person had put on this lotion. So do you see how the lotion was also connected to the behavior that they did? So what I remember as a kid was walking in the kitchen and seeing this person take, I'll never forget it, it was a brown handled knife that we had. And before my mom and I lived in Double Rock, we lived over in Holly Park. And I just remember this person pulling a knife out and them stabbing this person. Right? So it was the act, but what imprinted and solidified that memory for me was the smell of that lotion. And I'm going to tell you, I'm 44 years old.
Still can't use it.
And till this day, when people say the smell of lotion, I think my wife was actually going to buy some lotion one time. She's like, oh, my mama used to. I said, you can't get that lotion.
Yeah, seriously. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. Mm-hmm. How would you define abuse?
Simply the misuse of something. The misuse of something's intended use. So when we talk about abuse, you know, we talk about drug abuse, right? People say, why do you call it drug abuse? Well, because drugs in and of themselves are not bad, right? Drugs were created or designed to be able to serve a purpose. But when we begin to misuse them beyond the purpose that they were intended for, then it becomes substance abuse. When we begin to talk about child abuse, we are looking at the emotional component, right? So the emotional component is also the verbal. It's the psychological games that people play with children. If you don't do what it is that I tell you to do, I'm going to hurt somebody that loves you, right? Abuse is also accompanied by neglect. Neglect is the absence of meeting the basic needs, right? Being negligent, right? So a lot of the children and a lot of the people that I've worked with have had histories of abuse and neglect. But here in San Francisco, some of the earliest work that I ever did in social work was here in San Francisco working at the Family Mosaic Project. And it was difficult coming into my community, and in some cases people that I knew, right? But now I'm coming into the situation in a professional capacity, right? And it's like, it's one thing to know someone and you have your thoughts and your assumptions, but when those things become confirmed and you recognize and you realize that, you know, little so-and-so is really being abused, you know, they're not getting a spanking, no, they're getting the hell beat out of them. So much so that they can't go to school, right? So much, you know, so until, you know, I heard one lady say, yeah, I beat his little ass until it roped like okra, right? But abuse isn't just in that of children, abuse in a relationship, we can abuse someone's trust. We can abuse the fidelity of our relationship, right? Emotional abuse in a committed relationship. Feeling as though you don't have the ability to get your need emotionally met from your partner, right? Raises a red flag and causes us to ask the question, what are we pretending to not know?
Right.
Why is it that you're not safe with your wife, but you feel safer speaking to Shatika?
Because she was thick. Right. Abuse.
Abuse, right?
How
What do you want to ask me?
social worker, you got to pull kids from a home,
Yeah.
from people that you know, or from family. The internal battle of that.
So March is National Social Work Month. So this is Social Work Month, right?
Okay.
I'm going to tell you that when I first started working in child welfare, I never intended to go into child welfare. What I intended to do was to become a psychologist or an attorney. My mother told me that because I could talk and people like to talk to me, that you need to find a way to get paid.
Yeah.
So I looked up, well, what kind of, I knew that I didn't want to be a preacher.
Yeah.
In the traditional sense, because I'm like, you got to be talking on Sunday, and then depending on what you say, that offering is going to also speak to.
What's the Niners?
But I was going to be, I wanted to be an attorney or a psychologist. But when I got ready to go to college again, I was trying to figure out how am I going to pay for this. And so there was a scholarship called CalSWEC, which was the California Social Work Education Consortium, which was to professionalize the field of public child welfare, which is child protective services. And they said, we'll pay for you to go and get a master's contingent upon you giving 2 years back. So that's what I did, right? And so when I first
That was your time in LA County.
LA County,
Okay.
that's when I ended up going to USC. And it was $40,000 a year.
Wow.
Okay, it ain't that now. It's a lot more.
Crazy. Yeah.
Right. But I remember that being the first experience that I had where I was interning at this place and there was this little boy, 3 years old, and little black boy, and he would be wandering around the neighborhood. But before I even knew that he was in the neighborhood, he was in the child care center that I was interning at. And this kid was 3 years old, right? Couldn't talk clear. Couldn't put two sentences, that were appropriate for a 3-year-old. When I tell you that he could cuss with such clarity, and I mean,
Yeah.
I was like, it's like an old soul in there. I tell you that because when I got my job after I graduated,
That first 2 years.
after those 2 years and I started working for the department, the first case that I got was this little boy.
Wow.
And I had already knew who he was. And he also had a sibling who was a paraplegic, right? So his older brother was a paraplegic, wheelchair bound, couldn't speak. And mom was a video vixen. So mom would be turning tricks upstairs.
Wow.
And the 3-year-old would just be wandering without supervision, right? That was the first detention that I had to make.
Wow.
Is that I had to detain this kid from his mother. Now here's the thing. Mom had issues. Do I believe that mom loved her kid? I do. And see, I think that what we confuse is that we assume that parents are bad, right? Because of the things that they do. No, the behavior that they do is bad. But at the end of the day, I have found that these children would rather be with their parents who are abusive, living under a rock or a shoe, than in one of the best homes in Beverly Hills, right? Second time I had to detain a kid was from the labor and delivery in a hospital.
Right away.
when the child was ready for discharge. And I'm going to tell you what that created in me was, and I tell my staff this, if I've had to remove babies from their mothers, newborns, it ain't too much that scare me,
Right.
right? But I also had to get out of that work when I became a parent because my ability to be objective,
Yeah.
right? Because now, see, here was, I did that job 7 years before I had a kid. And then the moment my baby was born, every kid that I saw looked like my baby.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? I can't do this job the way that it deserves to be done because now I got judgment. Because I'm looking at my baby saying, I would never do that. So I don't understand how you can do that.
Right. Well, Dr. Jackey, I appreciate you coming out,
Thank you for
blessing
having
us
me.
with these gems. What are some of your future plans or collaborations? I know you're chilling right now, but you got anything?
I do. So I have private practice. I'm actually getting ready to prepare to sit to take the EPPP. So I have a doctorate in clinical psychology, and I'm licensed as a licensed clinical social worker. But I'm getting ready to be licensed as a licensed clinical psychologist.
Okay.
So getting ready to sit for that. Have some travel, and then I've been consulting.
Yeah.
So I've been able to take what I have been gifted with.
Yeah.
And work in the community that I grew up in.
It's good. It's a beautiful thing.
It is
Powerful.
So thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely. We might need a part 2, and I can see a different type of collaboration. Mental health it's so important. It's so important. If folks have any questions about the field, maybe someone's interested in social work, how can they find you?
So I can be found on Instagram under Dr. Jackey, DrJackey, or you can visit my website at Smith Counseling or SmithLCSW.com. So
Okay.
SmithLCSW.com.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it, Dr. Jackey.
Thank you,
Yes,
sir.
All right. We out.